again and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to be continuing our journey through the numbered cards of the suit of cups. So on the table here in front of me I've got cards 6 through to 10, and as always I'm working primarily with the Waitsmith deck, and we'll be supplementing that with cards from a Golden Dawn Tarot to clarify. Okay, in the last lesson I mentioned that the 4 and the 5 of Cups formed the first two parts of a trilogy of cards. Both of those cards dealt with different aspects of the concept of pleasure. The 4 had the rather odd term blended pleasure, which we also looked at as the concept of mixed happiness. The 5 dealt with loss in pleasure or disappointment, whereas when we get to the 6, we find the culmination of that trilogy. Now, 6 is numerologically is a number of perfection. We see the concept of perfection played out in all the 6s within the 4 suits. So in this case, pleasure is no longer qualified. You can see in the Golden Dawn deck that the key word is simply pleasure. Okay. Now, I think this is a very specific kind of pleasure. Now, my reasoning behind that thinking is the fact that we are still only at the number 6. We're not at the culmination of the 10. We're not at the end of the suit. So, I think the image actually explains itself. What we've got is a picture of innocence. We can see 2 children with 6 cups filled with flowers, and there's one older child giving the second child one of the cups. It's quite an idyllic setting. It looks like a sort of medieval setting. There's a church tower, maybe a country house. It's something quite lavish. It's certainly not peasantry. Strangely, if you look closely on the left-hand side of the card, there is an adult figure walking away. Now, it's the presence of the children here which I think are key to us understanding what sort of pleasure is being depicted here. The 6, as I say, is not at the end of the cycle. The more knowing forms of pleasure, the more mature and the more adult forms of pleasure, I think, are dealt with later on in the sequence. What we have here with the 6 as a number of initial perfection, I think, is the more innocent forms of pleasure. So the joys and pleasures that we would have experienced prior to our emotional and sexual awakening, brought on through adolescence, puberty, and the journey into adulthood. These are non-sexual pleasures, non-romantic pleasures. So what else? What's the other significance of these children? I think this card, and I think a lot of people read this card in a similar way to me, there is a heavy sense of the past and nostalgia in this card. When you think of this kind of innocent pleasure, very often our experience of that as adults is looking back, and, you know, in a way we see our childhood through filters as adults. You know, we're one step removed from it. This is almost like, this is pleasure before innocence was lost. So as adults, very often when we're looking at that, there is also the strong connotation of looking back and of nostalgia. Now, I think one of the key figures here, and it's one that I didn't understand for a long, long time, is actually the adult walking away. Because I think what we have here is, in these children, is a representation of us. It's a representation of our past and a representation of our sort of innocence, the innocent state of our childhood. And that is actually a state that all of us still carry round to a greater or lesser extent, and we often tap into. But I think what this person represents, he or she also represents ourselves. This is the past version of ourselves as adults. This is the present version. The fact that he is walking away from these children shows that as we get older, the gulf between this state of innocence and this state of adulthood gets wider. We grow in wisdom and experience as we get older. So pleasure, yes, but pleasure that I would say that excludes romantic and sexual pleasure. This is pleasure experienced on an emotional level almost through childlike filters. We can all experience this. The wonder that we feel at nature. What else could describe it? Simple things like the joy of a hug. Almost like the sort of glowing pleasure that we feel at the sight of a friend. Any of those things. All of the simple joys in life that actually cause our heart to leap, I think are denoted here. But also that sense of nostalgia and looking back to the past. So when this card appears in a reading, apart from denoting the things that we've just discussed, it can also denote looking back, looking back to the past, drawing on the past, seeing the past, seeing your childhood or the past through the eyes of your current state or your current adulthood. Nostalgia, potentially viewing the past through rose-tinted glasses, or any instance where the innocence of your past actually seeps into the present and informs it, or any way that the innocence of your past has shaped your present. So it's a very beautiful card, and I think one of the most vivid of the scenes in this deck. It does have dark sides. I think primarily, if you see this reversed, it's where the innocence of the past has been trampled on or destroyed, and for me, when this, if you're looking at the dark aspect of this card, or if it appears in a reversal, maybe it's drawing attention to some actually quite serious things like emotional or sexual abuse. It can be where the innocence of the past was tainted with grief. Maybe we've had to grow up too quickly in some aspects of our life, or all aspects of our life. Also, the dark aspect of this card can be a tendency to cling to the past, or a tendency to live in the past at the expense of the present. So in doing that, you may be clinging to the emotional joys that you felt in a more golden time, but you're also then potentially negating the possibility of new or deeper emotional experiences. So I think there's a lot to contemplate in this card. I think it's very multi-layered. But yeah, that in its simplest form, pleasure, but innocent pleasures. The more knowing forms of pleasure we'll approach as we go through this sequence. Okay. So we've had the perfection of the 6. What happens when that gets upset as we jump onto the 7? Like the 5, a number of instability. And that manifests in a very interesting way, I think, within the Suit of Cups. The Golden Dawn refers to this as the card of illusionary success. So on its own, what does that mean? I think this image really brings this to life. You see a figure looking into the clouds. Now, in these clouds are 7 cups. Each of these cups contains a different gift. Now, it's interesting because we have in one of them a castle on a high rampart, jewels and treasure in another, a laurel crown of victory, a dragon, a snake, this very mysterious veiled figure glowing, or a human face. Now, I feel each of these represents a very different symbolic gift. Some of them are quite easy to interpret. I mean, wealth, victory, dishonesty, or subtlety in the case of the snake, your hidden self. What else have we got? The dragon, make of that one what you will. I kind of tend to see that again as a kind of ferocity, a fieriness, maybe a dishonesty, a destructiveness, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a subjective one. Make of that as you will. The self-hidden, the self-revealed, or maybe this is the self that we would like to be. Maybe this is a kind of idealized self. But whatever the case, I mean, those are my subjective takes on the gifts in these cups. Whatever the case, there's a choice denoted here. But let's not forget the actual keyword title of the Golden Dawn card. These are illusionary choices. So, is that a good vision, or is it a deceptive vision? You could say in the upright that this card represents emotional choices. Now, the fact that these are visions, for me, and again, this is a subjective response to this card, you have to make that choice before the vision disappears. Now, is this a night scene? We don't know. But when the cloud disperses, the vision of the cups will go with it. So for me, whenever this card appears in the upright, I think it denotes emotional choices that actually have, you actually have to make those choices within a limited time frame. They're all very significant choices. They're all choices that actually affect both the future direction of your life and your emotional and physical well-being. So it is very much a crossroads card. But then if we look at the dark aspect of this, maybe this is chasing dreams at the expense of reality. Maybe those cups really are illusions. Maybe they represent things that we shouldn't be chasing, or things that are genuinely beyond our reach. So I think when this card appears, we have to really examine the nature of the choices before us, the impact of those choices on our personal lives, because the fact that we are in the realm of cups, water, the emotions, the heart, all of these choices actually have very personal consequences. The laurel wreath, for example, power. Power can corrupt relationships, Power can change the dynamic of a relationship. What was once an evenly balanced relationship if one person becomes more, much more powerful than the other, or even if that's in practical terms through the acquisition of wealth, the acquisition of a job, job promotion, all of that can have serious consequences on a relationship. Wealth, exactly the same. The snake, the potential for deception and dishonesty, that can destroy a relationship. But then again, also as well, sometimes that little white lie can save a relationship or shield someone from a truth that they don't necessarily need to know. All sorts of deep emotional questions going on here. But what matters is that if these are realistic choices, they're choices that have to be acted upon within a limited time frame. Turn it upside down, we are literally chasing cloud dreams at the expense of reality. And I think, if you're looking at this in this aspect in a reading, this is time for a reality check. This is time to actually ask what really does matter in your life, what matters for the sake of the people that you love, and where does your emphasis need to be refocused to if it's gone off the mark. Okay, so that's the 7. Moving on to the 8, 4 times 2. So again, there is a sense of completion and maybe drawing to a close with the 8s. That's certainly the case with the 8 of Cups. Illusionary Success was the title of the 7. Abandoned Success is the Golden Dawn title for the 8. So we're obviously, in the 7 we might have been in the realms of something that was debatable. You're obviously into the realms of something very real in the 8, and we see something very substantive in the Pamela Coleman Smith image. There you have your 8 cups, another stage card incidentally. So we have at the front of the stage 5 cups in a row and then the remaining 3 stacked on top of them. Now the backdrop, if you look closely at this image, there isn't actually a figure in this image, but there is the painting of the figure on the backdrop, which I find an enigmatic little touch. On a lot of the other stage cards, the figures are on the stage, not here. So it makes this card feel very lonely. What you have in effect is 8 abandoned cups. So they've been arranged in a very specific way. It's taken effort. But I think what's denoted here is the recognition that the effort that went into that, you've come to the end of a road. All the effort you've put into whatever this situation is, whatever this relationship is, whatever this connection is, it's run its course, for good or for ill. And the only thing that you can actually now do is to walk away. So if we look at this figure in the backdrop, they are wearing a red robe and red boots. Now that to me is very much a colour of passion. But there is, even just from the body posture, there is a sense of this person being crestfallen. Leaning on a staff, there is a sense of tiredness and fatigue. Again, there's a gulf between the stage and the figure in the backdrop, because actually if you look at the bottom of the backdrop, it's a pool, a stream, a river, and the figure as painted on the backdrop is on the other side of that body of water, walking away. Now, one of the key things here is the moon, which is quite ambiguous. We're not really sure whether this is a waning moon. You can see the crescent is on the left, so this is very much a waning moon, if that's indeed what Pamela Coleman Smith was portraying. You could also argue, if you look here, you can see this could also be an eclipse, because you see the crescent, but also you see the full sphere with a face in it. So both of which have similar significance. I think you could interpret this as either. If it's a waning moon, you're at the end of the moon's cycle. So a waning moon draws to the dark, and then, to the new moon and the waxing moon in the next cycle. If it's an eclipse, once again, there is a sense of closure. The light of the sun is being eclipsed by the moon. So, yeah, in the 8, there is a sense of resignation, a sense that actually, despite the success of this relationship, this situation, this friendship, this emotional connection, this family connection, we can go no further. The only place to go is away. So I think this speaks for itself in a reading. It denotes endings. This is not the final word. Like the Four of Wands, which was the wedding card, and the wedding denotes the beginning of the rest of your life. So with this walking away, you're walking away because it's actually the only way to step into what to actually step into your destiny or what awaits you. It basically denotes a situation that's run its course or a relationship that's run its course. And the key here is knowing when to let go, knowing when to walk away. Despite the sadness and the grief that sometimes causes. And as you can see, as we said, this figure is in red. There's passion being involved here, but that's just not enough. And this situation has had its day. If we reverse it, clinging on to the past when actually to do so becomes unhealthy. So something that actually would have been the healthy thing to do, to walk away, you actually turn this situation into something destructive or stagnant or abusive if you stay. This was exemplified for me through somebody I used to know who, as an older woman, her life was just eaten up by bitterness towards her brother. He'd set up a business, and one of the things that she wanted to do was work with him in the business. She wanted to work in his shop, and it was something that he didn't want, and he wouldn't give her a job. Now, considering this is something that happened in her 20s and 30s, you would think that by the time this woman got into her 70s, that she would have moved on for it, but actually she hadn't. And what was so sad was it was something that constantly would come up in her conversations time and time again. But you sense the bitterness, you sense the sourness and the resentment. And what made it worse is it had festered in her life for more than 30 years, to the point where it had actually eaten her away inside. And for something that started, okay, it's not something small, but then again, it's not something big either in the grand scheme of things. But the fact that she clung to that and was still living in that past moment and still emotionally demanding of him, even though he'd actually died some years before, she'd never forgiven him. And she was, in a way, part of her was still demanding that job in her 70s, which it just seems very sad. So this is the card of abandoned success. This is knowing wisely when it's time to go. Okay. So let's move on to the 9 and something actually more positive and more life-affirming. In the Golden Dawn, the 9 is referred to as the card of material happiness, which again is reflected, I think, very clearly in the Waite-Smith depiction. You can see this curved table covered with a blue cloth, and sat in front of it is what looks like a very well-fed, very well-dressed man, with a beaming smile on his face. I think it's a very simple and straightforward image. This is the happiness and the pleasures, the simple happiness and the simple pleasures of life. This is a carefree happiness. So think of it as happiness as experienced emotionally. Now, the fact that this man is actually quite well fed, and the fact that the cups lined up on the table, I think have obviously there is the symbolism of wine, of alcohol. This is carefree indulgence and the happiness and the emotional joy that comes from that. Sometimes that's an incredibly good thing. There are times in life where it literally is the right thing just to eat, drink and be merry. We all need carefree times. And actually the 9 as the initial culmination of the sequence of 10 brings us to a point where we can be carefree. We've gone through the growth process. We've gone through the trials and tribulations. This is just the time to be happy. So I think in practical terms, on a day-to-day basis, think those times when you've got where you want to go. There is a time to just indulge in the simple pleasures in life, whether it's food and drink, whether it's the joys of casual sex, the joys of an emotional connection or whirlwind romance that you know is not going to last, but that's fine too. That's what's denoted here. This is not deep, lasting fulfillment, but it is a very satisfying happiness. And everybody needs that from time to time. We all need respite from responsibility from time to time. And I think this is the kind of happiness and the kind of emotional relief that's denoted within this card. So this can very easily have a dark aspect. If we reverse it, this really does become a card of overindulgence and evasion of responsibility. You know, this is where, for instance, if we take the indulgence in casual sex, sometimes that can actually mask the fact that somebody is commitment shy. Picking up people, having whirlwind romances and dropping them, again, is denoted in the reversal of this card. Levels of emotional irresponsibility, where you are eating, drinking and being merry, but it's at other people's expense. If that indulgence in emotional happiness and pleasure costs the people around you, that's the dark side of this card. And I think if it appears reversed in a reading, they're the kind of questions that you've got to ask either of yourself or the person that you're reading for. In relationships, this sort of person is, somebody who's in this phase is not going to be able to commit in any meaningful way. And I think as well, this also, if somebody in this phase gets trapped within a committed relationship, this is the potential for affairs, for cheating, for dishonesty, for lack of transparency, because the sort of carefree pleasure and the irresponsible pleasure comes before the commitment. So this can be very positive. And as I said, there are times when all of us need this kind of carefree joy, but we do have to watch it doesn't spill over into irresponsibility, and that actually the indulgence of our carefree joy is not at other people's expense. Okay. So that brings us to the 10, the final card. And if the 9 is the culmination of the suit, the 10, as always, takes that culmination on to maturity and establishment. So, in the Golden Dawn, it is referred to as the card of perfected success. So, on an emotional level, we're looking at the crafting and perfecting of an established relationship. So, if this is carefree fun, or even if it's that carefree honeymoon period within a relationship, the 10 takes us to the lasting fulfillment and the fruits of that lasting, deep emotional bond. And understandably, Pamela Coleman Smith depicts this as a family under a rainbow. The cups, as you can see, are in the rainbow. A stage card again. The family are on the stage. The backdrop is their house and the sort of idyllic green landscape that's around it. Again, you can see there's water in that landscape. It's a river or a lake. I just think this is beautiful. You don't have to be straight, or you don't have to have children to appreciate the sentiment of this card. This represents any state of stable and lasting emotional maturity. Now, that can be within a relationship. It can be just a level of emotional maturity within yourself. But this is the rich rewards of commitment and experience. So, this can denote a relationship that stood the test of time, in any shape or form. the cups in the rainbow in itself is, to me, is a sign of completion and also of liberation. You know, completion in that the rainbow contains the whole visible spectrum. Liberation, obviously, you know, the rainbow as a symbol, is a very powerful symbol of freedom. Originally, its symbolic nature is denoted from, obviously, from the Old Testament myth of the rainbow after the flood, you know, showing calm and peace after the storm. But also today, and for somebody like me, the rainbow is a very potent symbol, because as a member of the LGBT community, the rainbow flag is the sign of freedom. So freedom through maturity. What this says is that commitment comes at a cost, but actually commitment also brings very deep and lasting rewards. Not just commitment to another person, but that commitment to emotional growth, that commitment to emotional maturity, the commitment to being outwardly directed, to commitment to love, to empathy, to compassion, charity, all of the things that we could connect with love and the element of water, sharing, or, you know, again, commitment to all those sort of things brought to maturity, and the rich sense of fulfillment and the deep, heartfelt sense of fulfillment that comes from that. Again, if you tip this the other way, on a practical level, that could denote a divorce, the shattering of a family. It could also, I often think that this reversed speaks very powerfully of dysfunctional family dynamics. What we see here is healthy emotional relationships. Reversed, codependence, connection through emotional blackmail and coercion and control, maybe, can be, you know, could be viewed in this as a reverse. And again, something similar to what we showed in, you know, in the other cards, that shunning of responsibility, the lack of commitment, the, again, you know, it can denote, it can denote secret affairs, not so much as in some of the other cards. The issue here is the upset of the mature balance. So I'm not making complete, this is one of those cards, I think the implications of its light and dark are so deep. You know, maybe I'm not making complete coherent sense on that one, but yeah, I think this is a card that everyone has to sort of really look and examine, because its implications, both like light and dark, are just, they are so wide ranging. What is a committed relationship? What is a healthy family? You know, what are the joys and the rewards? What am I working for? Is this worth it? You know, I mean, this image says, yes, it is. But, you know, when you reverse it, obviously that also speaks of the hard work and the, you know, the need for perseverance, and sometimes that doesn't seem very glamorous. You know, when you're persevering through really difficult times with a person, when the sexual attraction has gone, you know, when the kids are being downright naughty, when, you know, you don't feel understood by your partner, you don't feel as if you're connected, you feel isolated, yet within close proximity. Difficult times. But then it's the perseverance that pays off. But then again, you also, I think we go back to this. You can only persevere with somebody who's persevering with you with the right motives. So, you know, if you're into the realms of an abusive or a controlling dynamic, maybe it's time to walk away. So there you have it. That is the numbered cards from the Suit of Cups. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've enjoyed it, and in our next lesson we'll be moving on to the court cards within the Suit of Cups. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.